world was witnessing a first. The leader of a strategic, oil-rich country allied with the West on the brink of being overthrown by revolution, led by a quiet, simple spiritual leader. It was a romantic image for the Western media, who inevitably compared Khomeini to Gandhi. Meanwhile, Tehran's streets were taken over by mass protests. Communists, nationalists, socialists joined the revolutionary movement. And by this time, Ayatollah Khomeini was the undisputed figure around which they could unify their opposition to the Shah.
I don't think at the first days that he came to Paris he believed like that. I think that, like us, he believed that we will have a long way to go. But by the end of November and December, all the country was under his control.
The position of Khomeini in the revolution was such that because of his religious high ranks, he was able to address ordinary people in the street from all walks of life, in big cities, in the small cities, even in the villages. Because he was a religious man, many people, they felt religiously obliged to come, and it worked.
In January 1979, the Shah was forced to flee. He was now the one in exile. For the next 2 weeks, the country was preparing for Ayatollah Khomeini's return home after 16 years. The revolution had been won.
It was reported that on the way back from his final exile in France to Iran, he was asked by one of the journalists accompanying him, "What do you feel at this point?" And he said nothing, which was misinterpreted as a sign of gross insensitivity. On the contrary, it was an indication of a deep inner calm.
Yet as the whole world watched the historic event, Khomeini's sense of absolute certainty remained. Unprecedented crowds greeted his return on February the 1st, 1979. It seemed as though all of Tehran had turned out. Millions lined the streets from the airport to the nearby ZAHRA cemetery, where he finally addressed the people.
I think that in the beginning, he didn't much care if he was to have an official position within the governing hierarchy. He was the leader of the revolution. It was only after the revolution, when the Council of Experts reviewing the draft constitution, they incorporated his position within the constitution.
The constitution was written around Khomeini's ideology of Veliyat-e-Faqih, a religious guardianship of the country. A belief that no law is greater than the law of God was the cornerstone of Ayatollah Khomeini's philosophy. It had become the principle around which the new constitution would be written. It would also lead to Ayatollah Khomeini's appointment as Iran's supreme leader.
We opposed this idea, saying that he promised in France that the guardianship would be with the people and not with him. He replied that he had told a white lie. From then on, we realized he was a liar. Of course, in the first constitution, the country was under the guardianship of the people. But in the first assembly of experts, they changed this rule in favor of Khomeini.
Khomeini was to have final word on all decisions. He appointed the first post-revolution government. Top posts went to revolutionary leaders and clerics, many of whom used their newfound power to exact revenge on the Shah's associates. Many point to the revolutionary courts as the hallmark of what life after the Islamic Revolution would be like, a place with makeshift tribunals that claimed to be trying prisoners for such crimes as sowing corruption on earth and crimes against the people. Khomeini's opponents lay responsibility at his feet.
Overall, he took pleasure in taking power, and he didn't want freedom. He ordered political prisoners to be asked 3 questions, and if even one of their answers was wrong, they would be executed. A normal individual would never take this approach.
Several people talked to him that this is not the way, but in one of his statements, he told me that if you want revolution to succeed, sometimes you need to kill.
The ideals and aspirations of every revolution become lost with the grim reality of revolutionary power. Iran was to be no different. The West's romantic image of the revolution was about to end. It would come in November 1979. American support for the Shah was a key motivation for the revolution, and the issue was about to come to a head. University students acting on their own stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took those inside hostage. They claimed the embassy workers were all spies and were plotting to overthrow Khomeini and his government. Iran and the world were awaiting Khomeini's reaction.
Khomeini was very sensitive to the opinion of the masses. There was a big rally there, and that rally was broadcast, and that rally influenced Khomeini. Immediately the same Sunday that I went to visit him, I told him what has happened. His first reaction that afternoon to me was, go and kick them out. Who are they?
But many dispute this version of events.
The Supreme Leader would never say such a thing. If he had made any hint that he was unhappy about such an incident, they would have ended it immediately.
Whatever his private misgivings may have been, Khomeini publicly gave his blessing to the embassy attack, a decision that provoked uproar amongst many Iranian politicians.
The hostage taking took place in Sunday. In Monday, the cabinet unanimously voted for resignation.
And internationally, Khomeini was immediately vilified by most Western governments for his defense of the hostage takers. Gone forever was the image of the Gandhi-like spiritual leader built up by the Western media. In its place was the image of the Muslim cleric which fills the Western media to this day, harsh, angry, and implacably hostile, and above all, to be feared. The hostages would be held captive for 444 days. As Khomeini became the target of international condemnation, Iran was hit with harsh economic and political sanctions.
Occupying the nest of espionage for 444 days and taking hostages were not in our national interest at all. Later it was obvious, and other groups agreed with us. This act was not in Iran's national interest.
The entire civilian cabinet resigned, but for Khomeini, this was an opportunity to consolidate his idea of Velayat-e-Faqih, the world's first theocratic state. The revolution was not yet a year old, but was already beset by criticism at home and abroad. Emboldened by US military and financial support, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran in September 1980, a country still in the midst of revolution which he thought he'd overwhelm quickly. The US and Iran had become implacable enemies. Most Arab governments who were one-party states or absolute monarchies were terrified of the idea of Islamic revolution and supported and funded him. Khomeini, seeing the conflict as an opportunity to consolidate the clerical hold on power, described it as a war sent by God. It was on his orders that ceasefire requests by Iraq were dismissed, with deadly consequences.
He could avoid the war, and more than that, suppose that Saddam was an aggressor attack to Iran. After 2 years, we succeeded to kick him out of our country. We have to stop, ask for a ceasefire. But Ayatollah Khomeini was persuaded by Ayatollah Rafsanjani, his closest aide, and he was persuaded by the top commanders of Revolutionary Guard like MOHSEN Rezai that we have to go inside Iraq, we have to conquer Basra.
Iranian forces went on the offensive and a prolonged and bloody stalemate ensued. The Iran-Iraq war would last for 8 years and ultimately claim more than 1 million lives. It is often said that war is never won, but this saying can seldom have rung more true than for the Iranians who had incurred such terrible losses.
War had this destiny for our nation, to lose all these human resources and genuine capitals.
By the time a ceasefire was agreed in August 1988, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini was in his 80s and suffering from heart problems. Though it had been expected for some time, Ayatollah Khomeini's death on June 3rd, 1989 stunned the nation. Despite everything that had been done in his name and the revolution's name, he was still revered and venerated by millions who came out to mourn him. The grief so intense that his body was almost pulled to the ground as throngs tried to touch him. The funeral was so significant that it took precedence in the international media over the Tiananmen Square massacre.
He not only changed the region, he gave a personality to the Islamic world. I wouldn't say that everything that happened during the revolution was correct, but Imam Khomeini was very influential in world history, as well as the Islamic history. If we see progress in the Islamic and the Arab world today, it's due to his thinking and thoughts. He gave identity to Muslims around the world. Everyone accepts this. I'm honored that such a person is my grandfather.
The legacy of Ayatollah Khomeini cannot be underestimated. His life and his thoughts still permeate every aspect of life here. He is still very present in Iranian life, presence that echoes still throughout much of the world.